All right, all. Now that we've been a couple weeks in, I want to talk about your first major project. Okay. Your first major project, we're gonna take everything you guys have learned about, HTML and CSS, and we're gonna build a multi-page project. Okay. It's called Choose Your Own Adventure. And it's going to be kind of like a little interactive experience. Okay. I mean, it is a website. I feel like calling it a website makes people think it's going to be more like a Amazon or something like that. It's not quite that intense, but the idea is you're going to make a choose your own adventure story. It's going to have a story concept, a visual style, like colors and images and things like that. And users are going to be able to start and then occasionally make decisions like, go left, go right, pick up the ball, pick up the, you know, flowers, whatever. And these are ways of, having incorporating things like hyperlinks and things like that. Okay. So I'm not, unlike say some of the, what's the word I'm looking for? In the past, I've given you sort of like the follow along type labs. This project is completely open-ended. You can choose any story you want. You can choose any visual style you want. Um, I'm not going to tell you specifically how to write the HTML or CSS, but you have requirements. Okay. If you meet the requirements, then you do well, you get an A on the project. If you don't meet the requirements, then you're going to get penalized. Okay. So making sure that you meet the requirements is one of, if not the most important part of this. Okay. Um, Requirements of this project, there must be choices for the reader, meaning like it's not just A to B to C to D to E. Eventually, there needs to be places where the story diverges and people can choose one or the other. At least 3 points within your story. There must be at least 10 web pages total. You can have more than that, but you must have a minimum of 10. All HTML pages should have the proper syntax. That means like, doc type, head, body, HTML, head, body, that kind of stuff. Each web page should be stylized using CSS. This includes like text and backgrounds and whatnot. All your CSS has to follow the proper syntax. That would mean something like this, or it's like selector, brackets, property, colon, value type thing, semicolon. You should have images within your project. Not every single page has to have a image, but at least 4/5 of them should. You can either do that by implying them or applying them, putting them within the actual HTML. That would be like this, or it's like, I also will accept use of background images in CSS. So if you have something like, you know, let's say you put a background for a section or something, I would also, allow that as an aspect of that as well. I don't want you guys to use any HTML CSS that I have not talked about. That includes, but not limited to, use of CSS position, bibbity bobbity boom, CSS grids, CSS flexbox. Okay. Definitely no use of like, CSS variables or custom properties, that kind of thing. We will talk about these, but later. Okay. No use of any other programming language, so no use of JavaScript or anything like that. Okay. What you guys are going to do is you guys are going to submit me your final project as a root folder that contains all of the necessary files. That means all HTML files, CSS files, images. If you use audio and video, you need to include that in the root folder. And it should be structurally Correct. Meaning if I download your project and open up the first page, I should be able to just go through it everything without problem. Okay. In addition, you guys are going to upload this to your server. You can use the Infinity free server, or if you want to use GitHub, if you're aware of how to use GitHub and set up GitHub, you can do that too. But I want this to be live. Okay. So I want to show some examples. This is from last time I taught this course, which was last fall. So, oops, it's not giving me the correct. Ah, here we go. So this is a project. By the way, you can use, you can draw your own images, you can find own images. This person used ChatGPT. That's fine. I'm allowing it for image creation in this particular project. So notice how there's like hover effects. So this person has like a scary thing here. This person also did kind of like a scary story. I kind of like this one because it kind of looked like, assuming he did his own photos here. I'm not quite sure. Maybe he used AI. I'm not quite 100% sure, but he's kind of like a somewhere between a story and a video game. I kind of thought was interesting. I kind of like the visual style of it. Here's another one. Notice the hover effect here. So we will talk about hover effects. I just like the style of this one. So these aren't overly complicated, I would say, but they're fun. Little, you can see there's different possibilities here that people can work with. Okay. Hopefully that gives you an idea of what I'm looking for this project. All right, so this project is due in about literally a month. Okay. So I'm gonna be teaching you more stuff. So don't worry that you feel like maybe you don't know enough stuff, like structure or anything. We're gonna cover more stuff and there'll be some time to work on the project in class and whatnot. But I want you to start thinking about it. Okay. That kind of leads us to the next aspect, which is a synopsis and an inspiration board. Okay. There's an old saying in design, you measure twice and you cut once. And what does that really mean? Well, if you're cutting stuff out of paper, there's sort of no undo, right? So you want to make sure that you thought it out properly before trying to make the cut, right? And that's kind of the idea here. This is the design class. I mean, we are doing computer science for sure, but also it's like, we're doing design, and I want you guys to just think about the project. I know, like, okay, you're building a choose your own adventure story. What's the story about? What kind of decisions are going to happen in this story, right? Even before you get into any coding, any, HTML, CSS, it's like, what's even happening in this story, right? What's the visual style? This is a design class. It's like, are you using warm colors, cool colors? You want it to look more scary or more colorful? How do you create visual interest to get people to notice something or go along with, or have something stand out, that kind of stuff. So that's kind of what this is going to be about. So the first is just a synopsis. A synopsis is like a 1 to 2 paragraph overview of like, here is the story, this is what's happening, here are the characters, so on and so on. So, okay, there's a character and he or she is on a desert island and he or she walks around the island and they run into animals and maybe a pirate and maybe some treasure, like that's kind of the general story. And in the end, they find treasure and they get rescued, and now they're wealthy, or something along those lines, right? It doesn't have to be overly complex. It's just this is me, this isn't like about you're not writing, a novel here. You're just kind of laying out this is the general vibe. This is what's going to happen. You can write this in just submit to me as like a Microsoft Word text edit type file. The second is, this is a visual project, and, I want people to think about the visual aspects. And so there's something called kind of like an inspiration board. Some people kind of call it a mood board, but it's like, okay, what's the vibe? What is the visual look going to be of this project? So, okay, you guys know that there's going to be images. So it's like, what kind of images would be there? What kind of colors are going to be? What kind of fonts would be in this project? So I don't know. I'm just going to go to Pexels and it's like, I just want to find something that kind of matches the vibe. So it's like, yeah, maybe something like that. Or I don't know. It kind of has a Gilligan's Island kind of look to it. Oops, is that stock one? You tricked me, Pexels. You tricked me. I don't know. That's kind of the vibe I'm going for. Maybe this one. So I'm just gonna download it. And it doesn't even have to be just pictures. Maybe it's text. I don't know. Uh, I don't know. Maybe something where I'm just trying to get a visual vibe. Like I said, at this point, we're not really worried about code. We're not worried about HTML, CSS. It's really just like literally about like, okay, what is this going to look like? And I'm just kind of getting a vibe here. I don't know. Island, desert, island, treasure. Yeah, that looks kind of fun. Like maybe they walk around and it's like, it's in a cave and you know, there's a sword there. Don't ask me how a medieval sword got on a desert island, but let's not worry about reality here. Maybe there's like what would be on a desert island? Maybe there's like snake would probably be the most realistic. Of course, it doesn't have to be realistic, but all right. So I got some images, and it's like, okay, I want to set up a mood board or a. So I'm just gonna log into my. You can use any account you wanted, So you could do this in Pinterest, you could do this in Photoshop or Photopea or whatever. I'm just gonna do this in Figma, maybe not. I don't need more files, thanks. All right, so I'm gonna make a frame, aka like a document, and I'm just gonna bring in those images. I could resize them and, move them around and all that fun stuff. Hopefully this gives you kind of an idea of what I'm trying to do. And like, and so I want you to have a minimum of 10, okay? like I said, they don't all have to be images. It could be text because you are going to be implying text in this project. Maybe it's colors, color schemes. Oh, this texture, I found this really good texture that I like. Maybe that's going to be somewhere in my project. So that's what I'm trying to have you guys do here. All right. Whatever program you use, just create it as an image or a PDF. So I could take this frame and let's export this as a PDF. And it went to my downloads folder. And there's my PDF. Okay. Pretty simple, right? I did that in like legitimately 2 minutes. So that's all I'm asking you guys to do. And the point of this is to start thinking about the project. What's it about? What are you doing? What does it look like? And then, that kind of gets you in the mindset. And then eventually you'll start to, build stuff out of HTML and write CSS that's like, okay, how do I create this color? Or how do I incorporate this image into my web page? Blah, 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 blah. Okay. So I'm assigning it now, which is the 14th. It's due not this Wednesday, but the Wednesday after next. Okay. And it's due at 9 a.m. because I want you guys to chat about it in class. Okay. All right. Hopefully that makes sense. If you have any questions, feel free to email me at davidhurwich@sfsu.edu.